Hi everyone, meteorologist Craig Flint. Thanks for checking us out here on the Weather Academy. Just me today. We got to kind of change some things up here as we head towards the end of Weather Academy. We'll likely be alternating through as we head into the next week or two before we wrap it up. However, it's not going to go away completely. This will become more of a weekly thing. But let's get underway with today's topic, and it's drought, okay? It's something that you might not think about because it really doesn't impact you so much per se, but it's something that we watch for as we head into the summer months. And it becomes important, if you remember back to our couple of previous lessons about the water cycle, and when that water, especially groundwater, becomes depleted, it starts to turn into a little bit of an issue, especially for farmers and crops and stuff like that. So we're going to kind of discuss drought today and when it really starts to impact you. So we start out with drought. That's a picture of some corn stalks, probably somewhere in the Midwest. You can see how they're dried out, right? Lack of water into the crops. So let's start off with defining a drought. Okay, a drought is a period of abnormally dry weather sufficiently long enough to cause a serious hydrological imbalance. And what that is just a hydrological imbalance has to do with water and groundwater. We'll talk more about that in just a few moments. Let me go back there. Sorry about that. Let's talk about the types of drought because there are a few different types here. One would be a meteorological drought, the other known as a hydrological drought. The third one is an agricultural drought. And then the fourth one is something known as a socioeconomic drought. That's the big one. And we're going to define each one of these moving forward here. Okay, so let's talk about the impacts drought has. It can impact people, it can impact animals and crops, obviously, because if you want to come back to me on camera, a lot of what we do, life here on Earth as we know it, depends on water. Our bodies are water, animals need water, and you need that groundwater to produce crops and eventually food for you and me. So that's why, drought is a little bit of an issue. And we're going to actually explore what areas of the country are in a drought right now and what it looks like going forward. So while this may be something you don't think about every day, it is something that we continue to monitor as we go through the summer months. You know, if we happen to get into a period where we have abnormally below normal, I guess that would be abnormally, below normal rainfall. So those are the impacts of drought. Let's talk about and define what this can lead to. So a drought can not only impact people, animals, and crops, it can lead to the destruction of vegetation. It can also have an impact to soil and soil erosion. If it's very dry and you get a windy day, that soil just kind of blows around, it kind of depletes that soil. So soil erosion is definitely an impact in what a drought can lead to. And also water supply shortages. Water goes into the ground. We talked about that in the water cycle. Well, when that water table is low, it does present an issue for reservoirs and streams and such like that. So that's what a drought can lead to. What we want to do is define each one. So what we're going to do is start with a meteorological drought. And Cindy, thanks for rolling with the punches on the camera shots there. So a meteorological drought, that's something that we're most concerned with. That is when a dry weather pattern dominates a particular area. It could be any area of the country, even here in Northwest PA. And the thing about meteorological droughts is they can start and end very quickly, on a dime, really. So if you have a period of abnormally dry weather where we don't get a drop of rain, and then maybe we get, a week later, we get the remnants of a tropical system that slams into the Gulf of Mexico, and then the remnants of that system lift over northwest PA and just deposit copious amounts of water, that can actually end a meteorological drought. So while it can start quickly, it can also end fairly quickly as well. Next would be the hydrological drought. And what a hydrological drought is, it's when a low water supply becomes evident, especially in streams, reservoirs, and groundwater levels. When they get low, that's when we get into what's called a hydrological drought. Now, a hydrological drought usually happens after a long meteorological drought. So we just discussed what a meteorological drought is, right? So when you have a period of abnormally dry weather, that can eventually lead into what is known as a hydrological drought, which is the depletion of water levels in reservoirs, streams, and then the groundwater levels as well. So hydrological drought, it's kind of like a step up, and it becomes a little bit more of an issue, and it usually, again, happens after a period of abnormally dry weather, meteorological drought. All right, let's move on, and we'll talk about the next one. This one is an agricultural drought, and it's quite simply when the crops become affected. Remember that picture of corn I showed you at the beginning of the show with how dry and brown it looked? It's because the depletion of the groundwater, there's nothing for that corn stalk to feed on. So that's when droughts become impactful to crops. And we've seen this happen over the years as well. So when you start to notice that kind of brownish, kind of sorry look to corn stalks, that's when we start to get into like an agricultural drought. And it's not just corn stalks. It could be the citrus groves in Florida. But you know, with Florida, you get those afternoon showers and thunderstorms, so they're pretty okay. But like areas of the Midwestern United States, where if they get into a drought situation, it can be impactful to crops. Now the next one is what we term as a socioeconomic drought. This is the drought, this type of drought is when we, as consumers, start to feel it. It's when the demand for an economic good exceeds supply as a result of weather-related shortfall in water supply. Well, what does all of that mean? So think about it. If you are looking for corn, and we've been in a drought for a while, and the drought becomes so bad that it turns into a socioeconomic drought, which means if you want to go to the store and buy yourself a couple ears of corn, well, it's not there because of the drought situation that we've had. So when you get into a socioeconomic drought, that's when the consumer starts to feel it. All the other droughts that we discussed, meteorological, hydrological, you don't really notice those. You don't really think about those. They're not at the forefront of your mind. Droughts really don't become an issue until they reach the socioeconomic drought, which could have impacts, kind of like a ripple effect down the line for consumers like you and me when we go to the store and want to buy a particular good and it's not there as a direct result of a water shortage in the water tables. So socioeconomic drought, that's when it does become an issue, okay? So that's when it's really noticeable to you and me. Let's actually kind of delve into this a little bit more, and we'll talk about the different levels of drought. And you can see at the top of the graphic here, what I have is a little legend. You can see the colors. Yellow up to like a deep red or burgundy. And basically what that is the scale. So dry, moderate, severe, extreme, exceptional. And we're actually going to put this to use here shortly, and we'll show you what areas of the country are dealing with a drought right now. So that's your scale right at the top there. And there's, again, 5 levels: dry, moderate, severe, extreme, or exceptional. Now, the new drought monitor map gets released every Thursday, and the data and information comes from a place called the National Mitigation Center. These folks are monitoring groundwater levels and the like throughout the year. And what they do is they actually plot these data points on a map which show you what areas are most impacted by a drought, whether it be moderate, severe, extreme, or abnormally dry. So the folks at the National Mitigation Center are the ones that kind of monitor those conditions. So that's kind of a look at how it's rated, if you will. That little scale at the top. You can see the color codes there. And as you go up, obviously, as you go up the scale, obviously the drought becomes a little bit more extreme and in some cases exceptional. So let's put this to use, right? This is a look at the current National Drought Monitor. Again, the data comes from the National Mitigation Center. And you can see we kind of have a wide shot here, right? And you can see much of the country is void of any color, but there are some areas that are in a severe drought. So let's examine these areas a little bit more. Out west, it has been an ongoing thing for quite a while, and that's why you hear about forest fires and water shortages out west, because many areas of the western United States are in some sort of drought. You can see the lighter yellow shades there. That's just dry or abnormally dry. And then as you move up the scale, you get into the moderate category, kind of that beige color. And you can see that stretches into Utah and Nevada, up into sections of Oregon, over into Colorado. And then the next level up is kind of that orange color, severe. Again, sections of Colorado, northern New Mexico, sections of the Oregon coast down into California are in a severe drought. And in some cases, it's extreme. Those are the darker red splotches that you see on the map there in the western United States. Those are the areas that are in some sort of an extreme drought. Also down in Texas, you can see along the Texas Gulf Coast, around the Big Bend area, around the Galveston area and Corpus Christi, dealing with an extreme drought right now. And for a little while, South Texas was actually in an exceptional drought from Laredo down to about Brownsville, which is right there on the United States and Mexico border, those little blips that you see there. So those parts of Texas are dealing with an extreme drought. What about back here at home? Well, you can see we're pretty okay. We're in good shape. Our groundwater levels are good. We have sufficient enough water supply, so obviously no worries or concerns about drought right now here in Northwest PA or through much of the Northeast. You can see there is a little area in Michigan there that is a little bit on the dry side, abnormally dry, just north of Detroit. But for us here in Northwest PA, we're doing fine. We're doing okay in terms of our water levels. So certainly not like what they're dealing with out west. Now, there is one more type of drought that I want to define, and this one's kind of tricky. It's something called a mega drought. A mega drought is a drought that lasts 2 decades. Long time, in some cases even longer than that. Now here's the thing about a mega drought. There's still not a lot that's known about what exactly classifies a mega drought. And the scientists that monitor this sort of thing are still studying it to this day. The closest example that I can think of and did some research on were the Dust Bowl years back in the 1930s. And they used to get what's called black blizzards. And it was so dry back in that time period that the wind would basically pick up all this dust and it would become a huge dust storm. And it would blow this dust across the plains. In particular, you can Google this if you want to, Dallas, South Dakota, 1930 Dust Bowl. Google that, and you'll see some pretty shocking images of cars halfway, the dust was halfway up cars and farm equipment back then. Okay, so that just kind of shows you what a mega drought looks like. That's probably the best example. Now, scientists continue to study this because the western part of the United States right now is actually getting pretty close to what could be defined as a mega drought, lasting a period of at least 2 years, or 2 decades, excuse me. So we're getting close. We're teetering on it in the western United States. So they could really use the water out there. And think about it, you know, in the wintertime, they really rely on snowpack and all of the snow that falls in the Sierra Nevadas and the Wasatch and the Rockies. That snowpack, when it melts, filters into the groundwater supply and then eventually into the streams and creeks. But because there's been such a lack of a sufficient snowpack, that's why they've been so below normal for the past several years. And right now, there are no signs that that's going to change. So we'll be watching the western U.S., particularly with interest, to see if we can classify this as a mega drought going forward. So while droughts may not be something you think about very often, they can have an impact, and they do in many cases to you and me, especially when you get to that level of a socio-economic drought. So that's where we'll leave it with droughts today. Again, it's not something that impacts us directly, but if you get a period of abnormally dry weather, it can, and in some cases it is right now over the western United States. So don't forget your weather questions, weather at WJET-TV.com. You can send us an email asking any weather questions you want. We'll do our best to answer them for you. And of course, we want to know what is inspiring you as we make our way towards the end of the school year. Hopefully, you guys have taken away some pretty cool tidbits about weather and different types of weather here. But keep chasing that, what inspires you. Keep chasing that inspiration, because the more you can learn about something, maybe eventually you can turn it into a job, get paid to do it, and you'll never work. But in the meantime, if you have any questions about anything, weather, WJET-TV.com. That's where you could go. You could get directly in touch with me, myself, or Tom DeVecchio or Tom Atkins, and we, of course, will do our best to answer it for you. So that's going to do it for the Weather Academy today. Hope you have a little bit more of an appreciation for what a drought is. And coming up Friday, Tom will be talking a little bit more about the history of weather and some of the more impactful weather events that have happened here in Northwest PA. So thanks for logging on to YourErie.com, and we will see you next time.